All right. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Thank you for joining us today for another session of Voices of Healthcare Cloud. I'm Josh Thompson, an account executive here at Microsoft, covering mostly healthcare organizations, and I'm joined today by Aaron Perzondek, who's a customer success manager, also focused on our healthcare organization. We've got a few other guests that we'll introduce here in just a minute. And really excited for today's content. But before we get there, for those, anyone who may be new to these Teams live events and sort of our format, I just wanted to go over a brief, just housekeeping items. So first thing is we'd love to hear from you. We encourage you to ask, any questions throughout the presentation. The questions are moderated, and so Aaron and I will be picking them up kind of in the background and either answering them as one-offs or publishing them for the group. But we encourage you to interact through that Q&A. All of the content for today will also be recorded, and that recording will be posted to our blog site. There's a link you can see here to our Health and Life Sciences blog. So that'll be readily available for you after the fact. If this is your very first Teams live event, just really briefly, you should notice, different from a regular Teams meeting, just a button in the top right hand screen that's got those two kind of speech bubbles. That's what you can click to kind of access the Q&A. And then you can pose your question. You can see other questions or other things that people have posed or announced to the group. That's pretty much it in terms of housekeeping. So don't want to delay too much getting to the real meat of today's presentation. And I'll just kick it off by introducing today's topic, and as well as just briefly introducing today's speakers, and then I'll let them go much farther and deeper into their introductions and the content. But today we want to discuss frontline worker productivity and how Microsoft, IGEL, and Imprivata are all coming together to help improve those different frontline worker productivity scenarios. And so Juan Sifuentes was on our last session where we spoke about Microsoft's VDI, or Virtual Desktop solutions, Windows 365 and Azure Virtual Desktop. He came back now for round 2 after some really positive feedback, and he brought a few friends. And so we have Jason Mafera, the field CTO from IGEL, and then Christopher Feeney, one of the engineers and team leads at IGEL as well, who are going to be walking us through today's content. So without any further ado, I will pass things over to Juan, Jason, and Chris.
Thank you, Joshua. I appreciate it. And before we dive in, I just want to do a quick recap of what the last session was and what the main target, this second session. So last session, as a reminder, we went over the solution overview, just high-level understanding of what the solution experience is, the tap and go, right, for a Windows 365 cloud PC. The idea around how it brings a business value, to customers that have been dealing with tap and go experience for many years, and that how they can benefit from using that on a cloud PC. We talk about the gap that has been a major blocker in the healthcare industry for those customers that are looking to bring this experience to their clinicians. And now we're taking a second shot to dive deeper into the overall solution architecture, understand better the authentication workflow, some of the roadmap, new features that are being worked on, and some future user development as well that are being targeted. So with that and more, I'll pass it on to Christopher and to Jason.
Great, thanks, Juan. And we were excited about being here today. At this point, you should be able to see this screen that we're going to be walking through what we've been working on. I'm very excited about bringing this to our customers. Today's agenda, we'll kind of talk through basically some of the architecture that's behind how this all works together. So this is what we'll be doing over the next 45 minutes or so. Certainly, if you have questions, you can put them in that Q&A, and we'll be monitoring those and either answering them live during the presentation or certainly time at the end. A brief overview, if you're not familiar with IGEL, we've been around. We're actually a 21-year-old company. More specifically, have been working around in the US market for about 10 years or so. We have shifted over to a software-only focus. We have an operating system, Linux-based operating systems built from the ground up for security and built to really get you to those workspaces that have been out there in the world for a while. And the emerging ones that we're going to be talking about today are obviously what Microsoft has brought to market with accessing a cloud PC in Azure. But we sit on the endpoint. We're not a server-based OS. We sit on the endpoint. We can be installed on machines that are, x86, 64-bit platforms. Those a variety of everything from all-in-ones, thin client devices, laptops, desktops. And then we basically put a configuration on that device to provide the user experience to get to either apps or desktops in today's world, all of which is able to get managed by our management plane. And we can manage devices, whether they're inside the walls of a network or remote. Somebody could be, on vacation, and we can manage that. And so IGEL's really made a name in terms of some of the key things at the bottom. We really focus on a great user experience. If you get to that virtual desktop, for example, and your experience doing a Teams call or something like that is terrible, the user is going to reject it. And so we wanted to make that. And there's been a lot of collaborative effort to make that a really great experience, often basically leveraging the hardware on the endpoint that can manage the offloading of audio and video so that it becomes a great user experience as they're using a virtual desktop in many cases here. We also have a tool that's easy to manage devices. And what we mean by that is we have customers that have 30,000 endpoints under management with one person managing those as a full-time equivalent, essentially. So we don't take an army of people to manage these once they have a configuration model. And like we mentioned earlier, secure, we really built this from the ground up to be protected against ransomware and other types of the malware and other things. And so it's built to be a read-only OS for a purpose-based focus. And really, in the last several years, the sustainability aspect, there's a lot of e-waste out there. We can take devices that are 10, 12 years old in many cases and put IGEL on them. And certainly some of the newer devices, we partner with the likes of LG and HP and Lenovo and others that have great hardware, and we qualify those and make sure that the wireless chipset or the webcam or whatever it might be is working with IGEL running on there to access a cloud PC, for example. So just a high note. Now we're going to dig into some of the specifics around what we've actually built here. I'm assuming the folks that are on the call may be Imprivata customers, but if not, just a high-level pitch here. Imprivata has virtual appliances these days. They live in the customer's infrastructure that could be on-prem or in the cloud. Microsoft Imprivata has an Azure-based appliance version of this, but where we fit in is we're going to be on the endpoint here, the IGEL operating system. We've built our own agent for Imprivata. For years we had been working with theirs, and so we started developing our own, driven by different things. But what came about, we had customers, early adopters, I should say, in different parts of the world, where they really began to explore initially ABD and now cloud PC options. And so they wanted to, they fell in love with IGEL. They could repurpose their existing fleet of devices. They didn't have a ton of money for hardware refresh, but they really liked the IGEL story. They just needed to be able to get to this new thing coming out of Azure. So we built for that, and they wanted that tap and go experience. And so what we've got here showing is that the most heavily use case ones is going to be that Imprivata badge reader or username and password. They talk to our agent, we talk to the appliance, we authenticate the user, and then we drive the use case from there. Basically, we launch them into their virtual workspace. So for our initial release, authentication-wise, it's going to be a password or a proximity card with password or an Imprivata PIN. You can enroll the user, you can enroll their badge, you can enroll their PIN, and queue up questions and answers. And then more specifically, some of the authentication devices that we've validated and also some that are still in testing. So, but this is just sort of a quick overview of what that tap and go experience is going to be like. The next one, I'm going to show you a video real quickly. This is an early video. We have a full screen login experience now, but you'll see this as soon as I click. It's going to start this, and so with that. This is going to play out. I'll talk to it a little bit here. User is going to walk up to the device. They see we'll have a full screen version of this, but you can see here's user number 3 going to tap their badge. It's asking them for second factor. This is an Imprivata second factor. They have controls inside of that, so it's a PIN in this case. We've gotten credentials, and then we're launching them into the remote desktop. And so this is user getting connected in. Here's their cloud PC. And now that user is going to tap out, and that's going to disconnect their desktop. It's now parked and ready to be reconnected to. So this is user 2. They also have to type in a PIN before they can get into their workspace. And so we'll do that same experience. This one is actually set up so that Microsoft is recognizing that this user has more conditional access on there, and they're prompted for that. That could be a variety of conditions. It could be you're coming in from a new location, and so that still exists and it's still available. So this is user 2, and now we're going to do a tap over. So there's user 3 needs to come up to this shared workstation. User 2 was not using it anymore, and they just tapped over. And so Imprivata's had that functionality where you can disconnect the previous user's session and then tap in as the second user, and it doesn't. Basically doesn't break their experience. And so that's the key thing about this, and how Imprivata was able to grow inside of healthcare was figuring out how to provide a tremendous amount of value on the shared workstations that are used heavily in the world of healthcare, especially in the clinical setting. So that's basically what the user experience will look like. It'll look a little bit better with a full screen login here, but I'm going to move on to this architecture that we'll get into a little bit more deeply. But tap and go, launch my desktop, access to my applications, fast user switching, meaning I can switch out somebody else, and that's basically the key use case. And so what we have here is basically, as I mentioned earlier, you've got a badge reader plugged into the IGEL endpoint, and that could be a laptop, a thin client, all-in-one, whatever it is. Our agent is able to communicate with that. The user has a dialogue that they would interact with, username and password or badge plus PIN or whatever it might be. Once we get that from the user, we go and we authenticate against the appliances. And that'll be either on-prem or in Azure. The customer can mix and match them depending on how they want to do that. Once we receive those credentials validating the user, then we will take that information, and IGEL has built our own basically AVD Cloud PC client that has been in partnership with Microsoft. We get those credentials and we provide those to that, and then it launches the user into that experience, as you just saw a minute or so ago. That obviously goes out and talks to the Azure broker, goes through that back and forth to try to make sure we get the users to the right place. And as you can see, if they're entitled to that cloud PC, then they get launched in, and the next thing you know, they're looking at their virtual desktop. And Imprivata, if they're doing single sign-on, in many cases, they'll have the Imprivata agent installed in there. And so that's designed to get you single sign-on into applications that you might be accessing, whether it's web browser applications or locally installed. And in healthcare, it might be Epic, for example, or something. And so user will interact with that down here on the endpoint. And when they're finished, they just tap out, or somebody taps over, and we disconnect and park that session in the cloud. And then they can retrieve it from the same machine, or go around the corner or up the stairs or wherever they go back to their desk and tap back in, and they basically go return right where they left off. If there are any questions, I don't see anything unless somebody's monitoring, but certainly let's take a look here. We've got no questions so far. Perfect. Okay. I'm going to move on just one more slide, and then Jason's going to speak here in a couple pieces here. This is a little more detailed, but just wanted to speak to this a little bit. Obviously, in a healthcare setting, one of the things that's really nice is, if you're using the Azure infrastructure, this express route option. So we'll talk about it a little bit later, but This is often, you need this if you're going to have that, direct connection back into the cloud. And if you do, there's a feature called UDP short path or RDP short path. It's sort of interchangeable, but it's basically a faster way to get to that desktop when the user authenticates. And so IGEL does support that. We'll talk about that in a minute. But if the user is on-prem, they go ahead and authenticate. We talk to the appliances, and then we begin that process of getting them to their location. And the goal is, obviously, we want to get that user into their workspace in 10 seconds or less. That's really the key thing. And there's different ways to kind of handle that. Express route, a faster way to get there, but that's really the key thing. If they can be working in 10 seconds or less, that's sort of the baseline standard. Sometimes it might take a little bit longer because the desktop is spinning up or whatever it might be, but that's generally the standard that we're looking for. And a lot of it is often based on how the network is configured behind the scenes. What's more interesting is the remote worker scenario. IGEL can support the remote worker. And if you are talking to the appliances, obviously they're generally on-prem, so there might be a VPN connection needed to route that through that to talk to the appliances. But if you don't have the Imprivata agent on the IGEL device for the remote worker, they can still just use the IGEL Cloud PC client, if you will, authenticate, and you still have that multi-factor authentication conditional access scenario. For me, every time I go to log in, I'll get prompted by the authenticator app to either do the Face ID or provide a number or something, but it knows that especially if I'm traveling, I'm on a new network somewhere, it's going to ask me for that before it lets me in. So all of that is still available. And I don't see any questions, so I'm just going to continue moving on here. Oh, one thing before we leave this, not just the Imprivata appliances, but the IGEL components, how these devices are getting managed. Our software is called UMS, is the acronym Universal Management Suite. And that is basically software that's installed on a server. It could be a Linux-based server or a Windows server, for example. And then you configure that to manage the devices. Like the Imprivata appliances, it has a database on the back end. And that's if you have more than one appliance or more than one server, it synchronizes all that. And for the devices that are off the network, we have a product called the IGEL Cloud Gateway, ICG for short, that allows us to be able to manage a device anywhere in the world. As long as it's on the internet, we can talk to it, we can manage it, we can update it, we can control it, we can reset it, we can do everything we need to do to control that machine, whether they're in the office or out of the office. And that's one of the really huge benefits that, especially during the pandemic when people were sent home, customers need to be able to manage their devices regardless of where they were, and people were coming from all home and everything. And so that's a huge benefit to be able to control that experience. I'm going to pass the baton to Jason and let him take it from here for a little bit. Jason, take over.
We have a quick question, actually, Christopher, before we pass it on to Jason from the group. We can't really see the chat, with the question, but the person feeding directly on the other side.
Okay.
There's a question about if Imprivata One Sign-In can be used as a standalone for tap and go experience with all BDI solutions, or in all the scenarios, Imprivata would require another partner solution to work.
Yeah, I think so. It's probably better to go back to an architecture slide here. So I think they're referring to can you repeat the question if you don't mind?
Yeah, it says if the Imprivata One Sign-In solution can be used as a standalone for tap and go with all the BDI solutions, or in all the scenarios, Imprivata will require another partner solution for the tap and go experience to work.
I'm thinking of how to answer that. So the way
you take that one, Chris.
Yeah, go ahead, Jason. Fire away.
Yeah. So to answer that question, essentially, Imprivata does provide the technology for the tap and go components. It really depends on where you're accessing from. So if let's say you had a Windows endpoint and you were accessing from there, Imprivata tap and go would work from that Windows endpoint. Now, today, as things sit, Imprivata doesn't have any native support yet for AVD or Cloud PC. So today, the only path for Imprivata to enable tap and go in those environments is with partners. And right now, IGEL is the only partner so far that has fully certified and qualified those solutions. I know there are some other partners that Imprivata has that are in process of doing that, but we've been essentially in an early access phase for the last 6 or 7 months, and we already have this solution running in production with target customers that were part of that testing. So right now, IGEL is the only path for tap and go into these environments with Imprivata. That will potentially change towards the end of the year as Imprivata comes on stream with some of their own capabilities. But right now, it's IGEL. I hope that answers the question, Juan.
Yeah, and I'm going to try to respond in the chat here as you're going. So I'll move on to the pieces here. This probably help out a little bit, but take it from here, Jason.
All right, perfect. Thanks, Chris. All right, so just talking a little bit about what the core requirements are here from a system perspective. So on the Imprivata side, there are specific one-sign versions that are currently supported. Now, today, it's what they refer to as their version 7.6 and higher. So those are all the currently supported versions that exist for Imprivata. Their current version, I think, is 7.12 or something around that version. That's also supported. The difference here is a little bit around licensing. So on the Imprivata side, with 7.6 and higher, essentially till you get to 7.12, it requires what they call AM, VDA, and SSO licenses. Now, normally the AM and SSO licenses on the Imprivata side are always sold together, so that tends not to be a challenge. In the newer version of their appliance, it doesn't explicitly require that SSO license to function, but most customers have that already anyways for the enterprise single sign-on. So really not much of a difference here. I guess what to take away from this is that any currently supported Imprivata one-sign version is able to leverage this capability with our IGEL integration. Now with that, the other kind of caveat is that because the Microsoft stack relies on the UPN, that UPN must exist within the local AD and match what's used to access Windows 365 from an account perspective. So essentially what that means, and we'll get to, I think it's in the next bullet actually, part of the way the system needs to deploy needs to be in a hybrid Azure AD joined kind of methodology. So that's an Imprivata requirement today based on the way their components work for their agent to come online and work properly within that cloud PC. So UPN and this hybrid join need to both be enabled within the customer environment. Now, on the IGEL side, Chris had talked a little bit about this agent for Imprivata. So what's happened here, IGEL has built an agent that integrates in this way to leverage these Imprivata capabilities. That's built based on a set of APIs that Imprivata provides. So this agent that's doing all the heavy lift to get into the environment and automate that access is an IGEL component. It's not something that Imprivata built and delivered to us like some of their other solutions. So what that means is essentially everything on the endpoint side from an IGEL perspective is IGEL is responsible for the support, updates, new features, that sort of thing.
Jason, there's a question from the chat, and I'm wondering if there are any plans to support Azure AD Join Cloud PC?
Yeah, so we're working with Imprivata on that now. From what they tell us, they only have 1 or 2 customers that are trialing Astra, but we are, I guess, what Imprivata considers, and I forget, Chris, keep me honest, what they call it, premier partner or a strategic partner, which gives us access to Astra ahead of them releasing those capabilities. So we're already having discussions to have a tighter integration and leverage the new cloud-based SaaS OneSign Astra platform. So that is all in the works, and our expectation is that as that comes on stream, what Imprivata has told us to date is that their target right now for kind of Astra being generally available will be the HIMSS timeframe next year. So that's what we're coordinating to make sure that our support and this integration works and has been put through an early access process with some customers before we get to their GA. So that we expect that to be fully supported, because a lot of our components are now SaaS based, and so the integration is easier and more streamlined. I think that will remove the need for the hybrid join within Azure and having the local on-prem AD needing to be chained up to the Azure AD.
Of course.
So yeah, we're looking forward to that.
Yeah, just one point on this is obviously it was exciting to see healthcare beginning to adopt some of these cloud technologies in this capacity, especially for end user computing side of the fence. What I remember seeing is when Imprivata first began to make its headway into healthcare, you still had healthcare at the time. This is 10, 12 years ago. They had two directories. Often it was Active Directory or Novell, and they were migrating and supporting. They were both, and then eventually they would migrate away from one, and that was involving applications and users. So all this, we're beginning to see a similar thing here, and so obviously Imprivata's OneSign product is well deployed in healthcare and working primarily as far as who the user is, that their badge and their single sign-on credentials, that's on generally that on-prem directory, which as customers begin to adopt Office 365 and those types of things, they begin to get that Azure AD connector so that they can work against that. Now we're beginning to see that shift with other workloads. And so I think over the course of the next few years, we'll see customers where they begin to deprecate their older directory in favor of just pure Azure AD. And so that's the trend we're beginning to see. I think we'll see more of that over the coming years. So
awesome.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you, Chris.
All right, so no, back up one second.
Oops, sorry. There you go.
Let me finish this one. So when it comes to versioning and system requirements on the IGEL side, a specific version of UMS, this is one of the newer versions, current version of our management system. The IGEL OS itself, there's a specific version when we're talking about, there's OS 11 and OS 12 you'll hear us talk about. OS 12 is, you may also hear it referred to as the Cosmos platform. The OS 12 is the version that has all the cloud services and SaaS components that go along with it. So that's a transition that we've made recently. But on the OS 11 side, which is what's generally deployed within customer environments today, it requires an update to the OS version, 11.08.290. Anything there or newer is where this is supported. And then when it comes to OS 12, the model is a little different. It's not a monolithic firmware anymore. Everything is delivered as an application on top of the operating system. So there's a specific set of applications, if you will. So one being the Cloud PC app, and the other being the IGEL agent for Imprivata delivered for OS 12. Licensing, pretty straightforward. Workspace edition on the IGEL side. So anyone that currently is an IGEL customer that has active subscription-based maintenance, it gets this add-on at no charge. It is explicitly licensed, so it does require a new license key be added on the IGEL side, but there's no charge for that today. This is just something that, as part of the agreement with Imprivata to be the exclusive supplier of this capability for some amount of time, we agreed to license control the feature so that we could explicitly track it and manage it between the two organizations. We can move on from this one.
And just right. a heads up on the time, just so we keep track of the time as well on the next slide that we still have to cover.
You got it. All right, so supported features for GA. The agent itself, so what we're talking about is the IGEL agent for Imprivata. So the capabilities it has, and I know Chris went through some of these in an earlier slide, but full screen agent login UI. So what that means is a new version of a lock screen that, very similar to the way the Imprivata components work today, takes over the screen, enforces the authentication, whatever it may be, and then kind of starts that automation into the virtual environment. There's a series of auth methods that are part of the GA: password, prox card, so the tap and go, plus password or PIN as a second factor. Enrollment is also part of this. Because we're an endpoint operating system, we need to also allow users to enroll passwords into the system, enroll prox cards that they may not have used before, replace prox cards, enroll and update pins as they expire and change, and then enroll the Imprivata self-service question and answer components that are all part of their auth stack. So these are all part of that. The physical hardware devices that will allow you to tap that badge, that prox reader. So those are Imprivata branded RFIDs readers. Honestly, any other RFIDs reader that is capable of reading the card. And then HID OmniKey contactless readers are also supported. There's a couple asterisks there because that is still in qualification as we get to GA. So the specific models of OmniKey readers will be enumerated shortly in the next couple weeks. The RFIDs, or Imprivata branded RFIDs readers, that is the entire suite of those devices. So there aren't any that are not supported. That basically comes from a single toolkit that we integrate that allows us to have support across all of the RFIDs line of devices. And then the important part, the Imprivata virtual channel. So there's a component that allows for virtual channel interaction, which is critical for not only some of the auth methods, but especially doing healthcare specific workflows like EPCS upstream within an Epic session, those sorts of things. So that's a very important one that is part of GA to give us all those workflows, which we'll go through. Authentication workflows, so getting into various Azure stacks. So it's both Windows 365, Cloud PC, and AVD are both supported. Also, we have the ability to now do location-based resource selection. And what that means is if a user has multiple entitlements, if you will, if they have multiple desktops, say they have a AVD that is Win 10 multi-session, a Win 11 multi-session, and a Cloud PC, based on location, we can drive that workflow. This tends to be important in some of the healthcare workflows where in one location, they may want to drive into a specific version of a desktop for delivering Epic, et cetera, doing fast user switching, that sort of thing. So this is a extension beyond what Imprivata can do today with some of their policy, making it more location specific. And then really today, so this is across both OS 11 and OS 12. Implementation is slightly different, but the code base is exactly the same. The functionality and features are exactly the same. What I will point out here, though, is that right now that's today, and it uses what looks very much like an AVD client, and that gets into both environments today. In the very near future, we've got an OS 12 app that is specifically Win 365 branded. So we'll separate those experiences, although under the covers, the app is mostly the same. The Windows 365 one will bring in support for the frontline worker scenarios, which are not initially part of GA. But our follow-ons are relatively quick. So we're not talking quarters away. We're talking weeks to months away for those sorts of capabilities. And they just tend to be predicated on finishing up some of the extra work for the Win 365 scenarios. But today, we can deliver Windows 365 Cloud PC desktops with this integration on OS 11 or 12. You just don't get all the exact look and feel of the experience and no frontline worker quite yet. But that's a fast follow-on. And then
so Jason,
RDP, Yeah.
Quick question, Jason, on that, actually, just to enhance on that discussion, I think it's very important for some of the audience that is listening to this, the tap and go experience, specifically those frontline workers, part-time, traditional users that I'm not gonna need 24/7 access to a PC. You're saying that there's a timeline, a very short timeline that is being targeted to support the frontline licensing model Windows 365.
Yeah, to fully support it properly, right? I think that's, the biggest thing. We want to make sure that we're complying with all the, intricacies of the licensing. So that is in development right now, and we expect that it should be a fast follow-on. I don't have a specific date for it yet, but as we get a little bit closer to it and that work develops, we'll start to share those targets. But again, it's not, 6 months out. It's on the order of weeks to, a couple of months out. It's within Q3 without a doubt.
And definitely, I wanted to say that I think it's perfect timing because Windows 365 Frontline is also in public preview at the moment. So it's sort of like we have a lot of customers that are in testing mode, POC in this experience, understanding what more enhancement into the user experience they can bring into our development. So maybe by the time that it goes GA, this will be GA too.
Yeah, and I think, that is our goal, to make sure that we're well aligned from that perspective. So I think, the constant communication that we currently have as part of our partnership will keep us very tightly aligned on that so that we can, hit the market together, because healthcare is, on the IGEL side, our biggest vertical. Over half our business comes from healthcare. And so we have a very strong focus on anything that's going to help us drive business there. So we do see a lot of aggressive interest in moving in this way, and we'll use that, opportunity to make sure that we do our early access at the same time, so that we can make sure that, as we get to GA, and we can align those, that we can hit the ground running. So that's part of the goal there. And I know we're taking up probably too much time with some of these. RDP short path supported. Obviously, there are architectural implications of how that works, but there's nothing on our side that stops that from working today. Go to the next slide. All right, so I'm just going to very quickly go through some use cases. We go to the next one. So for us, there's really 3 big buckets. Shared workstation use cases, of course. So this is in-room workflows, exam workflows, kiosk workflows, making sure that workstations on wheels have what they need, that we can support dictation, and then physician and specialist scenarios. And, within each of these, there are intricacies, but our goal is to always align to the, the most widely utilized use cases within healthcare. And so shared workstations is one of those that, more often than not tends to be something where the EHR itself is in a mode, and most regularly it tends to be Epic in a fast user switching mode, being able to keep a session hot, do that switching, mix it together with stuff that we deliver on our local workspace on the desktop, like a browser, that sort of thing. So all of these are in scope of what we're delivering in GA. Next slide. Then there's also the back office use cases. We tend to be pretty strong outside of the clinical areas in the back office as well. So all these things that you see on this, I won't go into too much detail here, but any place where a user is going to be having non-clinical workflow interactions, we're also making sure that we cover those. And then if we go to the next one, and then obviously remote work, right? So work from home, call centers, and then for us, some of the additional use cases tend to focus around kiosks for registration, and then display and signage, so tracking boards, those sorts of things. So, our operating system is very flexible in these regards, and it allows us to cover a lot of these, some of which don't necessarily integrate tap and go, but still part of the overall workflows that we can deliver. Next one. All right, and Chris, you want to do this one? You want me to do this one?
You can take it, and then I got the next one.
All right, so roadmap. So where are we really going here? So outside of the basic things, the basic tap and go, we're going to be looking at adding more workflows. So these tend to be more around virtual kiosks that that haven't been implemented yet today. We've done it in the past with other integrations, so this is not, a long step. It's just more about working closely with Imprivata to make sure we've got all the right components enabled. One of which is making the virtual channel work in a kiosk mode, where you've got kind of a generic desktop that may do user switching on top of that. So fast user switching, if you will. We know we need to enable those. Those were not part of the initial GA because they're honestly kind of the smaller set of workflows and use cases, but those are high on the list. Also making sure that, like we talked about a couple slides ago, that the proper Windows 365 client with the right branding, look and feel, and capabilities are enabled there. We can do some of that today in the current version of the AVD client, but we need to continue that work and deliver that, which is on the near term. And then more authentication modalities. So ProxCard Tap and Go is great. Fingerprint is the next most widely deployed authentication modality. And in a lot of cases, it's not even necessarily used for primary authentication to the workstation itself, but it's used for EPCS, the electronic prescribing of controlled substances, to positively identify the clinician when they're prescribing or dispensing those sorts of things. And in a lot of cases, they tend to use fingerprint because a ProxCard tap today is not approved by the DEA for EPCS workflows. So you actually can't use a tap and go scenario for that. So it tends to be a lot of fingerprint authentication, and what would be considered hands-free authentication, what Imprivata calls that. That's basically a software token and a one-time password token on a device that when you go to do that EPCS workflow, it reaches out to the device and tries to get the OTP from the user. And part of some of the Imprivata secret sauce is they can do that in an automated fashion using Bluetooth if you're standing in front of that workstation. So that's one of the next capabilities that we'll provide. It tends to be all prioritized based on how widely adopted it is within the Imprivata customer base. And so we've taken kind of the biggest ones so we can cover the most in the initial versions, and then kind of rounding out the capabilities throughout, the rest of the year, if you will. All right.
I got one question before we jump into this slide. Actually, a question from the group as well. I think it is very exciting about learning the solution integration and all the what Underway covers. From a solution architecture, the authentication workflow, the support experience that is available today, what are the system requirements, and what is coming on the roadmap. But how much effort is needed to deploy this solution, to get it integrated? Can you speak a little bit about that? If it's needed, a partner engagement, can you share some details?
Yeah, certainly. So there will be some pieces that need to come together. And so there's some setup on the Imprivata side. There's some setup on the IGEL side. There is obviously stuff on the Microsoft side, so our approach is, if you're interested in this integration, you should already have a cloud PC ready to go. If you don't, well, come back when you're ready. So as long as that's ready to go, then on the IGEL side, like I said, we've already got a client that will get you to your cloud PC, and that's been around for a while. And we continue to add functionality to it, like you see here on the screen. We'll talk to in a minute. So, but as long as you've got, the right version of Imprivata, you got the right people on there, we can get the pieces built out. This is not a true to life situation, but as long as all those pieces are ready to go, it doesn't really take much time to get the Imprivata piece, the IGEL piece, but less than a day's worth of work to get the configuration set up, and then it's really kind of expanding from there. That means making sure the endpoint has the right firmware on it. or in the world of OS 12, the app or whatever, and then it has the license, and then once that is done, then it's really applying the configuration on it so that they would see the login screen when they walk up, and then at that point they can authenticate if they're already enrolled in the Imprivata. If they're not, then they would obviously need to enroll and go through that. But we don't have a services piece around this. That's kind of being worked through, but it's not like 10 days of work. It's really much less than that at all. But we'll have all that spelled out here as we go to GA in terms of that. But our goal is, as Jason referred to earlier, is we want to make sure the use case is validated before we try to set it up. And we've got checkboxes for that. For example, I'll go back to that prior slide. This virtual kiosk is a popular option that has come up more recently, not initially when we first started talking to customers, but it's become a thing because use cases might be, this is what the user sees if it's a Windows endpoint. And if they want to switch that to an IGEL device, they don't want the user experience to change. What could they do to make that happen? Well, they can present a cloud PC coming from the data center with the Imprivata agent. It looks exactly the same. And the IGEL device is on the endpoint, but the user experience looks like they're interacting with a Windows machine. They are, it's just virtual. But that might be a scenario. And so, but it's becoming popular around that, and we've seen it even before cloud-based virtual desktops. On-prem virtual kiosk was a thing, and Imprivata supported it for many years. IGEL as well. We just need to make it happen for the cloud scenario. So
I think just to synthesize that, for the audience, if you're already using IGEL or Imprivata, this stop and go experience is not going to be any different from what you've been using in the past. And it looks like the level of effort that we'll need to deploy this will be very short, very little. But the most important part, like you mentioned, is if you're looking to account this stop and go experience or bring the stop and go experience to Cloud PC, make sure that you already have at least the foundation of Windows 365 up and running with the license requirements in place, just so you can get into the next step. For those customers that are not very wildly new into this and looking to bring it to the organization, I'm assuming maybe a partner engagement will be the best route, for them to start building all the pieces in IGEL and Imprivata and Windows 365 together, right?
Yeah, and we're going to have training for our partners on this, as well as our internal IGEL team. That's being worked through right now. As Jason showed earlier, there are system requirements, so make sure that the customer has these things first and foremost, or we identify what's needed before we try to implement this. But yeah, there'll be a requirements checklist that we'll go through to find out if it's a good fit, or you want to go there. Here's what you're going to need to get there. So,
awesome.
With respect for
Thank
time,
you,
I just wanted to touch on this real quickly, and then we'll have a few minutes for questions at the end. But what IGEL is working on now is, especially with our Cloud PC app, that the Windows 365 app, is to support the boot to cloud option. You've probably heard some of that out there already. And then, of course, the frontline worker licensing situation here. And so if you want to read a blog about this, you can just go to this URL here, just tinyurl.com/IGEL Cloud PC, and that'll take you to this blog where you'll see this video of it as well. This is about a 2-minute video, kind of walking through what that experience is. It's not necessarily a tap and go scenario right now, but it's more of a IGEL in our partnership with Microsoft, supporting some of these new features that have been in development and are coming to market. I think we've got a little bit of time, so let me just click real quickly and see if this gets started. So this is basically showing you, similar to that first video. One of the cool things is, again, this is not tap and go, but IGEL now supports an Azure AD single sign-on scenario where the user authenticates against Azure AD, and then we basically get their credentials and log them right into the Cloud PC app. So this is a scenario. This might be, for example, a user, that remote worker at home that has an IGEL device, but doesn't have a badge tap, for example, but they can still get to their Cloud PC with what you're going to see here. And so the IGEL device is connected. Let's see if I can speed this up a little bit. So here's the user going to authenticate to Azure AD. So there they are typing in their username and password. Once the authentication is done, you can see the Cloud PC app is getting fired up, and there it says right up top there Windows 365. This is not set up to automatically launch. The user has a chooser there, and they just click that, and they're ready to go. But you can see there's some of those additional commands that are really a key part of that Windows 365 experience. And so that's the other pieces that we're coding and why we're building a separate app to take advantage of some of those new things that the Cloud PC solution offers. So with respect for time, again, you can see this whole video on this URL, but I'm going to just fast forward to the next slide. At igel.com, we have a website dedicated for Windows 365. You'll see it right there on the screen. So just igel.com/w365. You'll see some of this there as well as some other resources. If you're interested in the Imprivata integration that we have done, you can just do this URL or just scan this QR code. It'll take you to a form you can fill out, and then we'll follow up with you all from there. But this should have some questions on there you can quickly answer, and then we've already seen a great amount of interest, certainly in the last few months as we begin to talk about this more. But I'll give you another minute or so to get that QR code, and then we can answer any other additional questions. I don't see any, but
there's actually one question from the group, and my apologies that we haven't really been seeing some of those questions popping up on the Teams event. It looks like there was an issue with the link on how people join, but okay. I'm getting questions from outside that too. There's actually one question. If you want to go back into the previous slide on the boot to cloud, and the question is in reference to, will this boot to cloud experience support the frontline licensing model, to basically allow a user to log into more than one cloud PC. So if the user has many cloud PCs assigned to, based on provisioning policies, will be the user be able to pick and choose from this boot to cloud experience?
That's a great question. Yeah, I think so. I know that we're working in parallel for both features, boot to cloud and frontline worker licensing. Any other questions that are out there, Juan?
No, just that one.
Okay.
All right. Well, I know we're just about at time. Chris, Jason, Juan, thank you so much for the presentation and the content. I think this was super beneficial. Definite area of interest, and so thanks for just walking through all of the detail here. It's exciting to see all of the momentum and the interest, and hopefully we'll continue to get a lot more feedback and questions following the session. Just as we close, a reminder that the session's recorded. We'll post that recording to the blog page. This is our final session for this fiscal year. And so Microsoft's fiscal year ends June 30th. And so we'll look in the July or August timeframe to kind of kick this back off again with new content. But want to thank Chris, Jason, and Juan so much for all of the time today, and for everybody else for joining in and for watching. So thanks, everybody.
Yep.
Thank you, Joshua. Thank you, team.